Dr. Emily Weber froze, surgical forceps suspended mid-air, her eyes widening with disbelief. What she had extracted from James Reynolds's back wasn't the melanoma she expected to find. It was something moving. "Oh my God," Nurse Patricia whispered, then screamed, stumbling backward until she collided with the instrument tray, sending metal clattering across the sterile floor. Through the observation window, Catherine Reynolds pressed her weathered hands against the glass, her wedding ring catching the harsh fluorescent light. She'd known something was wrong with that mole for years, but never this. Never something that could make a veteran nurse of 30 years scream in horror. "Get Dr. Anderson in here now," Dr. Weber commanded, her voice steady, despite the trembling of her hands. What had been growing inside James Reynolds's back for 45 years since Vietnam? And more importantly, was it too late? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. James and Catherine Reynolds had built their life together in the small lakeside town of Pinecrest, Michigan, where the changing seasons marked the passing of their 50 years of marriage. Their modest two-story home sat 3 blocks from Lake Michigan, close enough to hear the waves on stormy nights, but far enough to afford their fixed-income retirement. The blue shutters needed painting, and the porch steps had begun to sag. But it was theirs, paid off after decades of careful saving. James had never been one to complain, not during his tour with the 101st Airborne in Vietnam, not during 30 years hanging steel as a construction foreman, and certainly not about his health. At 65, he stood as straight as he had at 25. His broad shoulders only slightly stooped from years of labor. His hands, perpetually calloused and cracked, told the story of a man who believed problems were solved through work, not words. The small bronze star, tucked away in his dresser drawer, spoke of bravery he never discussed. No sense dwelling on things you can't change was James's life philosophy, applied to everything from broken appliances to broken bodies. Catherine, or Katie as James had called her since their first date in 1975, had spent her career shaping young minds as an elementary school teacher. Beneath her patient exterior and soft blue eyes lay a will of iron that had served her well, both in controlling classrooms of rambunctious children and in managing her stubborn husband. What James didn't know was that before they'd met, Catherine had served as a battlefield nurse in the final years of Vietnam, an experience she'd buried so deeply that sometimes she convinced herself it had happened to someone else. Their only daughter, Sarah, had followed her mother's hidden medical inclinations rather than her known teaching career, becoming an emergency physician in Chicago. The 3-hour distance between them had grown greater than geographical miles, widened by James's disapproval of her divorce and his refusal to be a burden whenever health issues arose. "That mole's been there forever," James would dismiss whenever Catherine mentioned the dark spot between his shoulder blades. "Had it since Nam. Just another souvenir." She'd noticed it changing over the years, darkening, developing irregular borders, but James would wave away her concerns with the same certainty he used to predict Michigan weather. "Nothing to fuss about, Katie. Had it checked back in '82. Doctor said it was nothing then. It's nothing now." Their small-town doctor, semi-retired Dr. Grayson, had never pushed the issue during James's infrequent visits. "Some men of James's generation, they have to be bleeding out to see a doctor," he'd once confided to Catherine. "Best not to push too hard unless absolutely necessary." So life continued in their comfortable routine. Morning coffee on the porch when weather permitted, volunteer work at church, weekly calls to Sarah, monthly dinner with William Parker, James's war buddy who'd settled one town over, and yearly physical arguments that James eventually conceded to, grumbling all the way to the clinic and back. Their 50th anniversary tradition remained unchanged for decades. Home-cooked dinner, a single glass of champagne, and dancing to Sam Cooke's You Send Me, the song that had played during their first dance as husband and wife. Catherine had spent the afternoon preparing James's favorite meal, pot roast with root vegetables and her special cornbread that always earned a second helping. She laid out James's good blue shirt on the bed, the one she had given him 3 Christmases ago that brought out the faded blue of his eyes. The January evening had turned cold with snow beginning to fall outside their bedroom window, coating the lake in a pristine white blanket that reflected the setting sun. "James, you about ready? Dinner's almost done," Catherine called from the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. James emerged from the bathroom, towel wrapped around his waist, droplets of water still clinging to his silver hair. Despite the years, Catherine still felt that same flutter she'd experienced when they'd first met at her cousin's wedding. James had aged well, still strong, still handsome in that weathered way of men who'd spent their lives working outdoors. "Need help with those buttons?" she asked, knowing his arthritis sometimes made the small buttons difficult. "I can manage," he insisted, but stood still as Catherine approached to help. This silent compromise had become part of their rhythm, his insistence on independence, her quiet assistance, neither acknowledging the exchange. As she helped him slip the shirt over his shoulders, Catherine froze. The mole between his shoulder blades had changed dramatically since she'd last seen it during their summer trip to the lake. What had been a dark, roughly circular spot about the size of a pencil eraser had transformed into something larger, with irregular borders and varying shades of brown and black. Most concerning was the way it seemed to rise from his skin, no longer flat, but almost textured. "James," she said carefully, "when did this mole start changing?" James shrugged, reaching for his comb. "It's fine, Katie. Been there forever." "It's different," she insisted, her teacher's voice emerging, the tone that brooked no argument from even the most defiant third grader. "It's bigger, and the shape has changed." "Of course it has. I'm older. Everything changes." James met her eyes in the mirror, his expression softening at her concern. "Anniversary night isn't for doctor talk, honey. Let's enjoy our evening." Catherine reluctantly finished helping him with his shirt, but her mind remained fixed on what she'd seen. Throughout dinner, she found herself watching James's movements, looking for any sign of discomfort or pain. He caught her staring more than once, responding with a wink or a squeeze of her hand, misinterpreting her worry for romantic reminiscence. They were washing dishes together when the doorbell rang. "That'll be Sarah's package," James said, drying his hands. "She mentioned sending something for our anniversary." Instead, when Catherine opened the door, she found their daughter-in-law, Melissa, standing there with little Lily, their 5-year-old granddaughter. Snow dusted their matching knit hats. "Surprise?" Melissa said. "We were driving through on our way back from my mother's and thought we'd stop by to wish you happy anniversary. Hope we're not interrupting." "Never," Catherine said, genuinely pleased despite her preoccupation. "Come in out of the cold." Lily bounded in with the energy only kindergartners possess, rushing straight to James, who scooped her up in a bear hug. "Grandpa, I lost another tooth," she announced, displaying the gap in her smile with pride. "Well, now the tooth fairy is going to go broke with you," James teased, setting her down and hanging up her tiny coat. What happened next would forever mark a dividing line in Catherine's mind, the moment between before and after. James had crouched down to help Lily with her snow boots, his back to the little girl as he worked the stubborn zipper. Lily, peering over his shoulder, suddenly pointed and asked in that crystal-clear voice of childhood, "Grandpa, why is there a spider on your back?" The room went still. Melissa laughed nervously, admonishing, "Lily, don't be silly." But Lily persisted with the unfiltered honesty of children. "It looks like the spider we found in the bathtub, the one with the bumpy back." James straightened, reaching awkwardly behind himself. "There's no spider, sweetie. Grandpa just has an old spot there." Catherine exchanged glances with Melissa, whose expression shifted from embarrassment to concern. "James," Catherine said quietly, "let me see." "It's nothing," he insisted. But Catherine was already moving toward him, gently turning him around. "Let me check just to be sure," she said, her voice calm while her heart raced. She lifted the back of his shirt, and Melissa gasped softly. "James," Catherine said, her voice steadier than she felt, "I'm taking a picture of this with my phone, and you're going to look at it." For once, James didn't argue. When Catherine showed him the photo, his face paled beneath his perpetual tan. The mole had transformed dramatically, even since she'd seen it earlier that evening. The irregular borders now resembled appendages reaching outward, and the center had risen into a dome-like structure with a texture that, as Lily had innocently observed, resembled the body of a garden spider. "I'm calling Dr. Grayson tomorrow," Catherine said firmly. No arguments. James nodded, the sight of the growth seemingly shocking him into silence. That night, after Melissa and Lily had gone, Catherine lay awake beside James, listening to his breathing. For the first time in their marriage, she heard fear in the uneven rhythm of his inhales and exhales. Sometime past midnight, she felt him stir. "Katie," he whispered, It hurts. Never hurt before." Catherine reached for his hand in the darkness. "First thing tomorrow, James. I promise." Dr. Grayson's office squeezed them in between appointments the following morning. The elderly doctor's usual jovial demeanor disappeared the moment he examined James's back. "I'm referring you to a dermatologist," he said, already writing on his prescription pad. "Dr. Emily Weber. She's young but brilliant, just moved back to the area after practicing in Boston. I'm calling her office personally to get you in this week." "That serious?" James asked, attempting his usual nonchalance. Dr. Grayson met his eyes directly. "I don't want to speculate, but this needs expert attention immediately." In the car ride home, James stared silently out the window at the snow-covered landscape. Catherine reached across the console to take his hand. "It'll be okay," she said, though uncertainty edged her voice. "If it's what I think it is," James said quietly, "I need you to promise me something. Anything. Don't tell Sarah until we know for sure. No sense worrying her if it turns out to be nothing." Catherine nodded, though she suspected they were well past nothing. Dr. Emily Weber was younger than Catherine had expected. Maybe late 30s, with intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses and a warm smile that put Catherine at ease despite her concerns. She introduced herself with a firm handshake, then immediately addressed James directly. "Mr. Reynolds," Dr. Weber began, "Dr. Grayson sent over his notes, but I'd like to examine the area myself, if that's all right." James nodded, already unbuttoning his shirt with military efficiency. As he turned and sat on the examination table, Dr. Weber's professional demeanor momentarily slipped. Her eyes widened before she quickly composed herself. "How long have you had this growth, Mr. Reynolds?" she asked, pulling on latex gloves. "Had a mole there since Vietnam," James answered. "Been changing lately." "Define lately," Dr. Weber prompted, examining the growth without touching it. "Noticeable changes in the past 6 months," Catherine interjected when James hesitated. "But dramatic changes just in the past week," Dr. Weber nodded, taking photographs with a specialized camera. "And any symptoms? Pain, itching, bleeding?" "Some discomfort recently," James admitted. "Nothing I can't handle." "He's been having nightmares," Catherine added. "And he said sometimes it feels warm." Dr. Weber raised an eyebrow. "Anything else you've noticed, Mr. Reynolds? Even if it sounds unusual." James hesitated, glancing at Catherine. "Sometimes, and I know this sounds crazy, sometimes it feels like it's moving." Instead of dismissing this, Dr. Weber leaned closer to examine the growth. Movement sensations aren't uncommon with certain types of growths. The surrounding nerve endings can create that impression. She pressed gently around the edges of the growth, causing James to flinch. "Sorry," she said. "I need to check the borders." After several more minutes of examination, Dr. Weber stepped back and removed her gloves. "I'd like to do a biopsy today, if that's all right with you." "A biopsy?" James repeated. "That's where you cut out a piece to test it?" "Exactly. We'll numb the area first, of course. It's a standard procedure that will give us the information we need to proceed." "Proceed with what?" Catherine asked, her heart racing. Dr. Weber met her eyes directly. "I don't want to speculate until we have the biopsy results, but this doesn't present as a typical melanoma or basal cell carcinoma. The structure is unusual." "Cancer." James's voice was flat. "The biopsy will tell us more," Dr. Weber said diplomatically. "But I want to be straightforward with you. I'm concerned enough that I'd like to expedite the results. We should know something within 48 hours." As Dr. Weber prepared for the biopsy, Catherine watched James's face harden into the expressionless mask she recognized from difficult times throughout their marriage. When his father died, when they lost their second pregnancy, when Sarah announced her divorce, it was the face of a man battening down the hatches before a storm. The biopsy procedure was quick but tense. Despite the local anesthetic, James winced when Dr. Weber extracted a small portion of the growth. Catherine noticed the doctor's frown as she placed the sample in a container. "The tissue is denser than I expected," she commented, almost to herself. "I'm going to take one more sample from a different area, if that's all right." The second sample seemed to trouble Dr. Weber even more. She labeled both containers carefully before addressing them again. "I'm sending these to the lab today. I've marked them for priority processing." She handed James a bandage care sheet. "Please keep the area clean and dry. If you notice any increased pain, bleeding, or other changes, call my office immediately, day or night." I've written my cell phone number on the back of my card. In the car ride home, Catherine finally voiced the fear that had been building since Dr. Weber's reaction. She's worried more than she's saying. James stared straight ahead at the road. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Katie. Could be nothing. James Reynolds, in 50 years of marriage, I've never known you to be a liar." Catherine's voice was gentle but firm. "Don't start now." That night, while James slept fitfully, Catherine made a decision. She retrieved the small digital camera they used for holidays and family gatherings and set it up on the dresser, angled toward their bed. If James thought the growth was moving, she wanted proof, either to confirm his fears or to put them to rest. The next morning, Catherine reviewed the footage while James showered. Most of it showed nothing unusual, just James sleeping on his side, occasionally shifting position. But at 3:17 a.m., the footage captured something that made Catherine's blood run cold. As James rolled onto his stomach, the bandaged area of his back seemed to ripple slightly, the medical tape lifting at one edge as if something beneath it was shifting. She quickly closed the camera when she heard the water shut off. This wasn't something to show James. Not yet. Not until she understood what they were dealing with. The call from Dr. Weber came that afternoon, earlier than expected. "Mrs. Reynolds, is your husband with you?" Her voice was controlled but urgent. "He's out in the garage. Should I get him?" "Please. I'd like to speak with both of you." Catherine found James tinkering with their ancient lawn mower, though grass wouldn't need cutting for months. "Dr. Weber is on the phone," she said. "She wants to talk to both of us." James wiped his hands slowly on a rag, a deliberate process that told Catherine he was steeling himself. They returned to the kitchen where Catherine put the call on speaker. "Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds, thank you for taking my call," Dr. Weber began. "I've received preliminary results from the lab, and I'd like you to come in tomorrow morning to discuss them in person." "Just tell us now, Doc," James said gruffly. Is it cancer? A pause. The results are inconclusive in some ways. There are abnormal cells present that share characteristics with melanoma, but there are other findings that don't fit that diagnosis. What does that mean? Catherine asked. It means we need to do a more extensive removal and examination. I've consulted with Dr. Michael Anderson, an oncologist here in our hospital. He's agreed to see you tomorrow at 9:00 a.m. I'll be there as well. After they hung up, James stood silently by the kitchen counter, his face unreadable. "James?" Catherine prompted gently. "Knew a guy in my unit," he said finally. "Got some jungle rot that the medics couldn't figure out. Turned out he had some kind of parasite burrowed under his skin." He looked at Catherine, his eyes haunted. "You think that's what this is? Some Vietnamese bug that's been living in me all these years?" The question chilled Catherine to the bone because the thought had already occurred to her, not from James's military service, but from her own. She had seen strange tropical infections during her nursing days, things that weren't in any medical textbook. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "But whatever it is, we'll face it together." That evening they received an unexpected visitor. William Parker knocked on their door just after dinner, his gray hair wind-blown and his expression serious. "Heard from Patty down at the clinic that James has got some kind of growth they're checking out," he said without preamble when Catherine opened the door. Patty Johnson was William's sister-in-law and a nurse at the medical center. "News travels fast," James commented dryly from the living room. William entered, declining Catherine's offer of coffee. "Show me," he said to James. The two men had been through too much together for James to refuse. He turned and lifted his shirt, revealing the bandaged area. "What's under the bandage?" William asked. "Yeah, shape of it?" James glanced at Catherine. "Sort of spider-like, I guess. Emma called it that." William's weathered face paled. "Thought so. Johnson had something similar." "Johnson?" James said. "Remember him? Radio man from Charlie Company?" James nodded slowly. "Lanky guy from Ohio. Good poker player." "That's him. Ran into his widow about 5 years back at a VA event. She told me he died from some weird cancer. Started as what they thought was a mole on his back. By the time they figured out what it was, it had spread everywhere." Catherine felt her knees weaken and sat beside William. "Did they ever determine what caused it?" William shrugged. "VA doctors had some theory about Agent Orange exposure, said it created some unique type of cancer they hadn't seen before." He looked directly at James. "You were with us in the Blue Zone, weren't you?" James nodded grimly. 3 weeks in 71. Catherine looked between them. "The Blue Zone?" "What we called the areas that got the heaviest spraying," William explained. "You could tell because all the vegetation turned blue before dying." The three sat in heavy silence until William spoke again. "There's something else you should know, James. Before Johnson died, he told his wife the same thing you've been telling Katie." "What's that?" "He thought the thing on his back was moving." The waiting room of the oncology department felt colder than the January morning outside. Catherine sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, watching James flip through a month-old Time magazine without seeing the pages. They had barely spoken during the drive to the hospital, each lost in their own thoughts after William's disturbing revelation the night before. James and Catherine Reynolds, a nurse in blue scrubs, appeared at the door, clipboard in hand. "Dr. Anderson and Dr. Weber are ready for you." They followed her down a hallway lined with framed watercolors of peaceful landscapes, an attempt at calming that only heightened Catherine's anxiety. The consultation room contained a small conference table rather than an examination bed, suggesting this was a meeting for discussion, not treatment. Dr. Weber greeted them with a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Beside her stood Dr. Michael Anderson, A tall man with silver hair and reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He shook their hands firmly, his demeanor radiating the confidence of someone who had delivered difficult news countless times before. "Thank you for coming in," Dr. Anderson began once they were seated. "Dr. Weber has shared the biopsy results with me, and I've reviewed them thoroughly. We've also consulted with a pathologist at the University of Michigan Medical Center." "Just give it to us straight, Doctor," James said, his voice gruff. "What are we dealing with?" Dr. Anderson nodded, appreciating James's directness. "The biopsy shows characteristics of an atypical melanoma, but with several unusual features. The cellular structure is distinctive, not something we commonly see." "Is it from Agent Orange?" Catherine asked, remembering William's story. "My husband was exposed during Vietnam." The doctors exchanged glances before Dr. Weber spoke. "That's one possibility we're considering. There have been documented cases of rare cancers linked to chemical exposure during the war." "But there's something else," Dr. Anderson added, opening a folder on the table. He turned it to show them photographs of the biopsy samples magnified to show cellular details that meant nothing to Catherine or James. "The growth appears to have encapsulated some type of foreign material." "Foreign material," James repeated. "Something that doesn't belong in human tissue," Dr. Anderson clarified. "We won't know exactly what until we remove the entire growth and analyze it." "When?" Catherine asked. "As soon as possible," Dr. Weber said firmly. "I've scheduled an operating room for tomorrow morning. This isn't something we want to leave in place any longer than necessary." James leaned forward, fixing both doctors with a steady gaze. "Level with me. Is this thing going to kill me?" "Doctor." Anderson removed his glasses, meeting James's eyes directly. "Without removal and proper treatment, yes, eventually it could. But caught at this stage with appropriate intervention, your prognosis could be quite good. We simply need more information, which we'll get from the complete excision." As they discussed surgical procedures and recovery expectations, Catherine's mind drifted back to her nursing days in Vietnam. She had seen strange tropical infections, unusual reactions to environmental exposures, but nothing like what was growing on James's back. Part of her wondered if she should reveal her medical background to the doctors, but something held her back, a sense that her past and James's condition were connected in ways she didn't yet understand. After signing consent forms and receiving pre-surgical instructions, they made their way back to the parking lot. Snow had begun falling again, large flakes drifting lazily in the still air. "Should we call Sarah?" Catherine asked as James scraped ice from the windshield. He paused, the scraper mid-stroke. "Not yet. Let's wait until after tomorrow when we know more." He resumed the rhythmic scraping with more force than necessary. "No sense worrying her if this turns out to be simple." Catherine wanted to point out that nothing about this situation seemed simple, but she recognized James's need to maintain some control to protect their daughter even now. Back home, Catherine called their pastor to ask for prayers, made arrangements with their neighbor to collect mail, and packed an overnight bag while James sat at the kitchen table methodically cleaning his fishing lures, though ice fishing season was still weeks away. "Should call William," he said suddenly. "Ask him if he remembers anyone else from our unit with similar symptoms." Catherine nodded. "Good idea. I'll make us some lunch first." As she assembled sandwiches, her mind kept returning to the video she'd taken of James's back. Should she show it to the doctors? Would they think she was overreacting? Or worse, would they dismiss James's sensations as imagination if they didn't see movement themselves? She was still debating when the phone rang. It was Sarah. "Mom, is everything okay? Pastor Jim just called to check on you and Dad. Said something about Dad having a procedure tomorrow." Catherine closed her eyes, silently cursing small-town communication networks. "We were going to call you after we knew more, honey." Knew more about what? Sarah's voice sharpened with concern. Mom, what's going on? With a sigh, Catherine explained the situation as calmly as she could, downplaying their concerns while still conveying the seriousness. I'm coming, Sarah declared before Catherine had finished. I can be there by tonight. Sarah, you don't need to. Mom. The steel in her daughter's voice was painfully familiar. It was James's determination in a younger female version. My father is having surgery to remove a potentially cancerous growth tomorrow. I'm coming. End of discussion. After hanging up, Catherine returned to the kitchen to find James staring out the window at the falling snow, his sandwich untouched. Sarah's on her way, she told him. He nodded without turning. Figured she would be. She's stubborn like her mother. Like her father, you mean? A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Maybe a bit of both. That evening, James's discomfort increased noticeably. He shifted constantly in his chair during dinner, unable to find a position that didn't pressure the growth. By bedtime, he admitted to a burning sensation that over-the-counter pain relievers barely touched. Maybe we should call Dr. Weber, Catherine suggested, watching him wince as he tried to get comfortable in bed. And say what? The thing you're cutting out tomorrow hurts today? Nothing they can do tonight, Katie. She knew he was right, but sleep eluded her nonetheless. Around midnight, she heard Sarah's car in the driveway. Their daughter had made the 3-hour drive from Chicago in record time, despite the snow. Catherine met her at the door, embracing her tightly. At 40, Sarah still looked so much like the serious little girl who had once declared she wanted to fix people when she grew up. Now, an emergency physician, she had fulfilled that childhood ambition. How is he? Sarah asked, shrugging off her coat. Pretending it doesn't hurt as much as it does, Catherine answered honestly. You know your father. Sarah nodded, her expression grim. And what aren't you telling me, Mom? I could hear it in your voice on the phone. Catherine hesitated, then led Sarah to the kitchen table. There's something I need to show you, she said, retrieving her camera. Sarah watched the nighttime footage in silence, her professional demeanor firmly in place. Only the slight whitening of her knuckles as she gripped the camera revealed her distress. Have you shown this to his doctors? She asked when the video ended. Not yet. I wasn't sure if they'd take it seriously. They will. This confirms what Dad's been feeling isn't imagined. She looked at Catherine with narrowed eyes. There's something else, isn't there? Something you're not telling me. Catherine sighed, suddenly feeling the weight of secrets kept for decades. Not now, Sarah. After the surgery, when we know what we're dealing with. Morning arrived with a sense of suspended reality. James was uncharacteristically quiet as they prepared to leave, methodically going through his pre-surgery checklist as if preparing for a military operation. No food or drink after midnight. Shower with the special antibacterial soap. No jewelry or metal objects. At the hospital, the admitting process moved with well-oiled efficiency. James was taken to a preparation room while Catherine and Sarah settled in the surgical waiting area. Dr. Weber stopped by briefly, her confident smile providing a measure of reassurance. We've assembled an excellent team, she told them. Dr. Anderson will be assisting, along with Dr. Patel, who specializes in complex dermatological surgeries. We're going to take very good care of James. Catherine nodded gratefully, then remembered the video. Dr. Weber, there's something you should see before you begin. She handed over her camera, briefly explaining what she'd captured. The doctor's professional composure slipped as she watched, her eyes widening slightly. Thank you for showing me this, Mrs. Reynolds. It's helpful information. She handed back the camera. I'll discuss this with the surgical team immediately. After Dr. Weber left, Sarah turned to Catherine with questions in her eyes. Mom, what do you think is really going on? And don't tell me you don't have theories. I know that look. Catherine hesitated, then decided her daughter deserved honesty. Before I met your father, before I became a teacher, I was a nurse. Sarah blinked in surprise. A nurse? You never told me that. In Vietnam. That's where I learned nursing, in field hospitals during the final years of the war. Why would you keep that secret? Catherine stared down at her weathered hands. When I came home, people didn't exactly celebrate those who'd been part of that war. And the things I saw there, I wanted to forget, to start fresh. Teaching seemed like a way to create rather than just repair. She looked up at her daughter. Your father doesn't know. We met after I'd already changed careers. Sarah absorbed this revelation in silence before asking, what does this have to do with Dad's condition? I treated soldiers with unusual tropical conditions, infections that behave differently from anything in medical textbooks, and once I assisted with a case similar to your father's, a growth that seemed to have its own movement patterns. What was it? We never definitively knew. The soldier was evacuated to Japan before final diagnosis. But the working theory was a tropical parasite of some kind that had established itself in human tissue. Sarah's medical mind engaged visibly. There are documented cases of parasitic infections remaining dormant for decades. This was different, Catherine insisted. The encapsulation had developed abnormal tissue that resembled cancer but wasn't quite the same. The military doctors were fascinated but also disturbed. Their conversation was interrupted by a nurse informing them that James's surgery had begun. Now there was nothing to do but wait. The minutes stretching into hours marked only by the steady tick of the waiting room clock and the occasional announcement over the hospital intercom. Around noon, Dr. Anderson appeared in the doorway, still wearing his surgical cap. His expression was unreadable as he approached them. The surgery is still in progress, he began, but Dr. Weber asked me to update you. We've encountered some unexpected findings. Catherine's heart stuttered. What kind of findings? The growth is more extensive than the imaging suggested. It has developed a network of fibrous extensions beneath the surface of the skin. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. And we've confirmed there is a foreign object embedded within the growth itself. What kind of foreign object? Sarah asked, her physician's demeanor taking over. That's what we're working to determine now. It appears to be organic in nature, possibly parasitic, as you suggested, Mrs. Reynolds. Dr. Anderson looked directly at Catherine. Does your husband have any history of skin penetration wounds or other embedded foreign bodies from his military service? Catherine shook her head slowly. Not that he ever mentioned. He received a Purple Heart, but he never talked about the circumstances. Dr. Anderson nodded thoughtfully. We're proceeding carefully to remove both the growth and the embedded object intact. Dr. Weber will come speak with you when the procedure is complete. After he left, Sarah turned to Catherine, her face pale. Mom, this sounds exactly like what you just described. The case from Vietnam. Catherine nodded, a chill running through her despite the overheated waiting room. I know. If Dad has had something in his body all these years without knowing it, then what else hasn't he told us about his time in Vietnam? The question hung between them as they continued their vigil, each lost in thought about the man they both loved and the secrets he might have carried for nearly half a century. The surgical suite maintained its sterile hush, broken only by the steady beep of monitoring equipment and the occasional metallic clink of instruments. Dr. Emily Weber stood over James Reynolds' prone form, her focus absolute as she carefully separated the growth from the surrounding tissue. Remarkable structure, she murmured, more to herself than to her surgical team. I've never seen anything like this network of fibrous extensions. Dr. Anderson leaned closer, his experienced eyes narrowing behind his magnification loops, almost like it's anchoring itself deliberately. See how these tendrils follow the fascial planes. Blood pressure holding steady at 110/70, the anesthesiologist reported from behind his monitors. Dr. Weber nodded acknowledgement without looking up, her hand steady as she traced another extension of the growth. I want to keep this as intact as possible for pathology. Nurse Johnson, can you adjust the lighting? Patricia Johnson, head surgical nurse with 30 years of experience, repositioned the overhead lamp to better illuminate the operating field. In all her years at Pinecrest Regional Hospital, she'd never seen anything quite like what lay exposed on James Reynolds's back. Dr. Weber, she said, the base is pulsing slightly with his heartbeat. See it? Indeed, the central mass of the growth seemed to have its own blood supply, synchronizing with James's cardiac rhythm. Dr. Weber carefully clamped and tied off several small vessels feeding the mass. We're getting close to the foreign body, she observed as her scalpel revealed a deeper layer of tissue. I can see something reflective. Dr. Anderson adjusted his position for a better view. Definitely organic material, could be parasitic, as we suspected. As Dr. Weber carefully dissected the final layer of tissue encapsulating the foreign object, she paused, frowning. This is unusual. The growth seems to have formed a perfect cavity around whatever this is. Using delicate forceps, she gently probed the exposed edge of the object. It shifted slightly, revealing a distinctive shape. That's not random tissue, Dr. Anderson said, his voice tense with surprise. That appears to be a parasitic organism. Dr. Weber carefully worked her instruments around the object, freeing it from the surrounding tissue. As she lifted it away from the cavity, the full structure became visible, an encapsulated parasite approximately 1 cm in length, its surface discolored but still recognizably a tropical organism not native to North America. My God, Nurse Johnson whispered, the words escaping involuntarily, then louder, a reflexive cry of shock as the tissue around the now empty cavity seemed to collapse and then restructure itself before their eyes. Oh my God! Her scream echoed through the surgical suite, startling everyone present. Through the observation window, Catherine Reynolds pressed her hands against the glass, her heart racing at the sudden commotion. What is it? Dr. Patel asked sharply, moving closer to see what had caused the experienced nurse's outburst. Dr. Weber remained steady, though her eyes widened behind her surgical mask. The tissue, it's reconfiguring. I've never seen anything respond like this to foreign body removal. It's like it was built around the parasite, Dr. Anderson said, his scientific curiosity temporarily overriding his surprise. The body created this elaborate structure to isolate it, or to use it. Look at how the growth interfaced with it, Dr. Weber murmured, placing the organism carefully in a specimen container, almost like it was utilizing the parasite as a framework. Nurse Johnson regained her professional composure, though her hands trembled slightly as she assisted with the instruments. I'm sorry for the outburst, doctors. I've just never seen tissue behave that way. None of us have, Dr. Anderson assured her, returning his attention to the surgical field. Now, let's complete the excision and ensure clean margins. I think we've given the Reynolds family enough drama for one day. Dr. Weber nodded, focusing on removing the remaining tissue and ensuring no traces of the growth remained. I want comprehensive testing on both the growth and the parasite, full histology, toxicology, and biological analysis. In the observation room, Catherine and Sarah watched intently, unable to hear the conversation, but sensing the gravity of what had just occurred. Something happened, Sarah said, her physician's instincts alert to the shift in the surgical team's body language. Something unexpected. Catherine nodded, her heart pounding. The nurse screamed. Patricia Johnson has been a surgical nurse longer than Dr. Weber has been alive. It would take something truly shocking to make her react like that. They fell silent as Dr. Anderson approached the observation window, his eyes meeting Catherine's through his protective goggles. He gave a reassuring nod and a thumbs up, the universal sign that things were under control, before returning to assist with the closure. Another hour passed before Dr. Weber emerged from the surgical suite, her cap removed but still wearing her surgical gown. Her face showed both fatigue and excitement, the look of a physician who had encountered something professionally fascinating. "Mrs. Reynolds, Dr. Reynolds," she acknowledged Catherine and Sarah formally. "James is stable and being moved to recovery. The surgery was successful in that we removed the entire growth and what appears to be the causative agent." "Causative agent?" Sarah repeated, her medical training engaging. "What did you find?" Dr. Weber gestured toward the consultation room. "Let's sit down. This will take some explanation." Once seated, Dr. Weber placed a sealed specimen container on the table. Through the clear plastic, Catherine could see a small organism, discolored and distorted but recognizably biological. "This was embedded in the center of the growth on James's back," Dr. Weber explained. "It's a tropical parasite, approximately 45 years old, based on its condition and composition." Catherine stared at the specimen, her mind racing back to her nursing days, to wounded soldiers and field surgeries. James never mentioned being injured in a way that could introduce a parasite. "Many veterans don't discuss their injuries," Dr. Weber said gently, "especially wounds that weren't life-threatening at the time." "But how could he not know?" Sarah asked, examining the container without touching it. "Surely he would have felt something burrowing into his skin? In combat, especially under intense conditions, it's not uncommon for soldiers to sustain injuries they're unaware of until later," Dr. Weber explained. "And this particular species of parasite is known to enter through small breaks in the skin without causing significant initial discomfort. They're native to Southeast Asian jungles." Catherine nodded slowly, remembering triage protocols from her own service. If it wasn't causing immediate symptoms, they would have prioritized more critical injuries. "Exactly," Dr. Weber confirmed. "But what's truly remarkable is what his body did in response to this foreign organism over the decades." She pulled out several photographs taken during surgery. Laying them on the table, Catherine and Sarah leaned forward to see detailed images of the growth, its spider-like extensions, and the cavity where the parasite had resided. Instead of forming a simple encapsulation around the parasite, which is the normal response to a foreign body, James's immune system created this elaborate structure, Dr. Weber explained, pointing to various features in the photos. "It's unlike anything I've seen in medical literature." "But why now?" Sarah asked. "Why would it suddenly change and become symptomatic after all these years?" Dr. Weber shook her head. "That's one of many questions we don't have answers for yet. It could be age-related immune changes, environmental factors, or simply that the structure reached a critical mass." She looked directly at Catherine. "Has James been exposed to any unusual chemicals or environments recently?" Catherine thought carefully. "Nothing out of the ordinary, just his usual routine, fishing, woodworking in the garage, church activities." "What about his diet or medications?" "He takes blood pressure medication and a daily aspirin. Nothing else regularly. Doctor." Weber made notes on her tablet. "We'll run a full panel of tests on the tissue and the parasite. The preliminary findings are intriguing." "Intriguing how?" Sarah pressed, her professional curiosity evident. "The growth shows characteristics of both cancerous and non-cancerous tissue. It had developed its own blood supply like a tumor, but was contained and organized in a way tumors typically aren't. And the tissue immediately surrounding the parasite had an unusual cellular structure, almost symbiotic in composition, as if it had been adapting to the parasite's presence over time." Catherine felt a chill at these words, remembering similar descriptions from military doctors in Vietnam. "Is it dangerous? Could it spread?" or return. We took wide margins to ensure complete removal, Dr. Weber assured her, and will monitor James closely. But until we understand exactly what we're dealing with, I can't make definitive predictions. A nurse appeared at the doorway. Dr. Weber, Mr. Reynolds is awake and asking for his family. Relief washed over Catherine. Can we see him now? Dr. Weber nodded briefly. He'll be groggy from the anesthesia and on pain medication. We'll keep him overnight for observation, but barring complications, he should be able to go home tomorrow. They followed the nurse to the recovery area, where James lay propped on his side to avoid pressure on his surgical site. His face was pale, but his eyes were alert as they approached. "There's my girls," he said, his voice raspy from the intubation tube. "Surgery go okay?" Catherine took his hand, struggling to maintain composure. "It went fine. They got everything out." James's gaze shifted between them, his perception sharp despite the medications. "What aren't you telling me?" Sarah stepped forward, ever the doctor, even with her own father. "They found a parasite embedded in the growth, Dad." "You had a tropical organism in your back, apparently for decades." James's expression didn't register surprise, only a weary confirmation. "Figured it might be something like that." Catherine stared at him. "You knew?" "Not for sure," he admitted. "But I took some shrapnel during a firefight near Quang Tri in '71. Medic patched me up, said most of it was superficial." He closed his eyes briefly. One piece went deeper. They were going to airlift me to the field hospital, but then we took heavy fire again. By the time it was over and we got back to base, the wound had closed up. They figured if it wasn't causing problems, best to leave it alone. "And you never thought to mention this?" Catherine couldn't keep the hurt from her voice. James's eyes opened, meeting hers with a mixture of apology and defensiveness. "When I got home, everyone was either treating vets like we were monsters or looking at us with pity. I didn't want either. I just wanted to move forward." His hand tightened around hers. "And by the time I met you, it seemed like ancient history. Never gave me any trouble until now." "Well, it's out now," Sarah said pragmatically. "And they're running tests to understand exactly what it was doing in there all these years." James nodded, then winced as the movement pulled at his stitches. "So, what happens next?" "Rest and recovery," Catherine said firmly. "And no more secrets, James Reynolds. Not about your health, not about Vietnam, not about anything." A faint smile crossed his pale face. "Yes, ma'am." Later, after James had drifted back to sleep and Sarah had gone to make phone calls, Catherine stood by the recovery room window, watching snow fall in the early winter darkness. Dr. Weber found her there, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Thought you might need this?" she offered, passing one to Catherine. "Thank you." Catherine accepted gratefully, the warmth of the cup comforting against her cold fingers. They stood in companionable silence for a moment before Dr. Weber spoke. "Your husband is a remarkable man. Not many people could carry something like that for decades without complaint." Catherine nodded, watching James's chest rise and fall in sleep. "He's carried more than that, I think. Things he never talks about from the war." "That generation often doesn't," Dr. Weber said softly. "My father was in Vietnam, too. He didn't speak about it until he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. Then the stories came pouring out like he couldn't take them with him." Catherine turned to study the young doctor with new understanding. "Is that why you came back to a small-town practice? Because of your father?" Dr. Weber smiled sadly. "Partly. He died during my residency in Boston. Coming back here felt like a way to honor him, to serve the kind of community he valued." She hesitated, then added, "When I saw what we removed from your husband today, I thought of my father. He carried his war in his nightmares. James carried his, physically in his body." The metaphor struck Catherine deeply. We all carry something, I suppose. Mrs. Reynolds, Dr. Weber said carefully. There's something else you should know. The preliminary examination of the growth shows unusual properties. We're sending samples to specialists at Walter Reed and the CDC. This could be an important case for understanding how the body responds to foreign organisms long-term, especially in veterans exposed to tropical parasites during deployment. Catherine tensed. Are you saying James might become some kind of research subject? Nothing invasive, Dr. Weber assured her quickly. Just analysis of the tissue we've already removed. But the findings could potentially help other veterans facing similar issues. Catherine considered this, watching her husband sleep. How many others might be carrying fragments of war in their bodies, ticking time bombs waiting to manifest decades later? Whatever helps others, she finally said. James would want that, but his recovery comes first. Absolutely, Dr. Weber agreed. And speaking of recovery, you should get some rest yourself. We have your cell number. We'll call immediately if there's any change. Catherine nodded but made no move to leave. I'll stay a while longer, just to be sure he's resting comfortably. Dr. Weber understood. With a gentle squeeze of Catherine's shoulder, she left her to her vigil. Alone with her sleeping husband, Catherine finally allowed herself to process the day's revelations. James had carried a piece of the war inside him for their entire marriage, and she had carried her own secret, her service as a nurse, the horrors she'd witnessed and tried to forget. Perhaps it was time for both of them to unburden themselves of the past they'd been carrying for far too long. James's homecoming the following day should have marked the beginning of recovery, but life rarely follows expected paths. Catherine had prepared their bedroom with extra pillows, arranged his medications on the nightstand, and stocked the refrigerator with easy meals. Sarah had taken a week's leave from the emergency department to help with her father's care, setting up a makeshift office in the spare bedroom. The first 2 days passed uneventfully. James slept most of the time, the pain medication keeping him drowsy but comfortable. He followed post-surgical instructions with military precision, allowing Catherine to change his dressings and taking antibiotics without complaint. The surgical site looked clean, with no signs of infection or unusual healing. On the 3rd day, everything changed. Catherine woke at dawn to find James's side of the bed empty, the sheets cold. She found him in the kitchen, sitting rigidly at the table, staring into a cup of untouched coffee. His face was ashen with a light sheen of sweat despite the chill in the early morning air. "James, what are you doing up so early?" She approached cautiously, alarmed by his appearance. "Couldn't sleep," he said, his voice strained. "Back's on fire." Catherine immediately placed her palm on his forehead, feeling the heat radiating from his skin. "You're burning up. When did this start?" "Middle of the night. Thought it might pass." He winced as he shifted position. "It's getting worse." Sarah appeared in the doorway, already dressed for the day. Her clinical gaze assessed her father instantly. "Dad, you need to lie down. Let me look at your back." In their bedroom, Catherine helped ease James's pajama top over his shoulders, while Sarah snapped on latex gloves from her medical bag. The bandage covering the surgical site was spotted with a rust-colored discharge. "This doesn't look right," Sarah murmured as she carefully removed the dressing. What lay beneath caused both women to inhale sharply. The incision, which had been healing normally the previous evening, was now angry and inflamed. The skin around the stitches had taken on a peculiar mottled appearance, with areas of deep redness interspersed with pale, almost bloodless patches. Most concerning was the distinct swelling that seemed to pulse slightly with each beat of James's heart. "We need to get him back to the hospital," Sarah said, her professional demeanor firmly in place despite the fear Catherine could see in her eyes. Now, within the hour. James was back in the emergency department, his temperature climbing to 103 as Dr. Weber examined the surgical site with growing concern. "This isn't a typical post-surgical infection," she said, gently probing the swollen tissue. "I'm seeing unusual characteristics in the inflammatory response." She looked up at Catherine. "Did anything change in the last 24 hours? Any new medications, foods, environmental exposures?" Catherine shook her head. "Nothing." He was following all the instructions. Dr. Weber turned to the emergency room nurse. "I want broad-spectrum antibiotics started immediately and alert Dr. Anderson. We need to consider taking him back to surgery to clean out this site." As the medical team rushed to implement orders, Catherine found herself pushed to the periphery of the room, watching helplessly as her husband's condition deteriorated. His breathing had become labored, and the monitor showed his heart rate increasing as his body fought whatever was invading it. Sarah approached, putting an arm around her mother's shoulders. "They're doing everything right, Mom. The infection just took hold incredibly fast." "This isn't just an infection," Catherine said with quiet certainty. "This is something else." Before Sarah could respond, Dr. Anderson entered the room quickly, donning gloves to examine James. After a brief assessment, he conferred with Dr. Weber in low, urgent tones. Catherine strained to hear their conversation. "Unusual presentation. Resistant to standard prophylaxis. Need to explore the site immediately." Dr. Anderson approached them, his expression grave but composed. "Mrs. Reynolds, we need to take James back to surgery right away. There appears to be a severe inflammatory response developing at the surgical site, possibly with a resistant infection." "Do whatever you need to do," Catherine said, clasping James's hand. His skin felt frighteningly hot against hers. James's eyes fluttered open, finding Catherine's face. "Katie," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "If anything happens—" She cut him off firmly. "This isn't goodbye, James Reynolds. You're going to be fine." A ghost of his familiar smile crossed his face. "Still giving orders after all these years." As they prepared to move him to surgery, James suddenly gripped Catherine's hand with surprising strength. "There's a metal box," he said urgently. "Back of my workbench. Combination is your birthday. If I don't—" He paused, struggling for breath. "You should know what's in there." Catherine's throat tightened. "You can show me yourself when you're better." James's eyes held hers with an intensity that belied his weakened state. "Promise me you'll look." "I promise," she whispered, pressing a kiss to his forehead as the transport team arrived to take him to surgery. The surgical waiting room felt colder and more sterile than during their previous visit, the cheerful paintings on the walls now seeming mockingly bright against the gravity of the situation. Catherine sat rigidly in the uncomfortable chair, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. "Mom," Sarah said gently, placing a cup of tea beside her. "You should try to drink something. It's going to be a long wait." Catherine nodded absently, her mind elsewhere. "That box he mentioned, I never knew about any metal box in his workshop." Sarah sat beside her. "Dad has always been private about some things." "Too private," Catherine said, a trace of bitterness creeping into her voice. 50 years of marriage, and he's still keeping secrets." "Everyone has parts of themselves they keep hidden," Sarah observed. "Even you, Mom." Catherine looked up sharply. "What do you mean? You never told me you were a nurse in Vietnam, never mentioned you had medical training at all." The simple statement hung in the air between them. Not an accusation, but a recognition of a truth they both now understood. Their family had been built on a foundation of unspoken experiences carefully omitted from the stories they told about themselves. "I wanted to forget that part of my life," Catherine finally said. "When I came home, I couldn't bear to think about what I'd seen, what I'd done. Teaching children seemed like the opposite of patching up broken soldiers, a way to build something instead of just trying to keep it from falling apart." Sarah nodded slowly. "And Dad probably felt the same way about his experiences." "But his secret nearly killed him," Catherine said, her voice breaking. "If we'd known about that parasite years ago." You can't know that it would have made any difference, Sarah said, her physician's pragmatism emerging. That growth could have formed regardless, or removing the parasite earlier might have caused different complications. Their conversation was interrupted by William Parker, who appeared in the waiting room doorway, his weather-beaten face creased with concern. "Heard James was back in the hospital," he said, approaching them. "Patty called me." Catherine nodded, grateful for his presence. William was the closest thing to family they had in town beyond Sarah. "Some kind of infection or reaction at the surgical site. They've taken him back into surgery." William settled his lanky frame into a chair across from them. "Tough old bird, your husband. He'll pull through." "You knew about the injury, didn't you?" Catherine asked suddenly. "You knew he'd been wounded." William's silence was answer enough. After a moment, he sighed heavily. "It was a bad day near Quang Tri. We were pinned down for hours. James took a hit helping drag Wilson to cover. By the time we got medevac out, there were men a lot worse off. The medic patched him up, said the wound had debris in it, but most of it was removed." He paused, his gaze distant with memory. James never wanted a Purple Heart for it. Said too many better men had died earning theirs. Catherine absorbed this revelation, trying to imagine her husband as the young soldier William described, brave enough to risk his life for a comrade, humble enough to dismiss his own sacrifice. "Why wouldn't he tell me this?" she asked, the hurt evident in her voice. William shrugged. "You didn't know James right after he got back. None of us talked about what happened over there. It was like if we didn't say it out loud, maybe we could pretend it never happened." He looked directly at Catherine. "And James changed after he met you. He wanted to be the man you thought he was, not some damaged war vet." The irony of this statement wasn't lost on Catherine. Hadn't she done the same thing? Reinvented herself as a school teacher, burying the battlefield nurse she had been? Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Nurses occasionally updated them, but the information was frustratingly vague. "He's still in surgery. The doctors are addressing the infection. We'll let you know when there's more to report." Afternoon faded into evening. William went for sandwiches that none of them could eat. Sarah made phone calls, arranging for more time away from her practice. Catherine sat motionless, watching the institutional clock tick away, minutes that felt like hours. Finally, near midnight, Dr. Weber appeared, still in surgical scrubs, her face drawn with fatigue. Catherine stood immediately, reading the gravity in the doctor's expression. "James is in critical condition," Dr. Weber began without preamble. "We've cleaned out the surgical site and found an aggressive infection unlike anything I've encountered before. The tissue around the original incision was compromised." "Compromised how?" Sarah asked, her medical training pushing through her personal concern. "The infection appears to be causing rapid necrosis along the fascial planes where the growth had extended its tendrils. It's as if removing the growth triggered an inflammatory cascade that's destroying the surrounding tissue." Dr. Weber ran a hand through her hair, disheveling her surgical cap. "We've placed drains and started him on 3 different antibiotics, but his body is under tremendous stress." "Will he recover?" Catherine asked, the only question that mattered. Dr. Weber met her gaze directly. "I can't make promises, Mrs. Reynolds. The next 24 to 48 hours will be critical. His age and overall health work in his favor, but this infection is aggressive and unusual." "Can I see him?" Catherine's voice was barely above a whisper. "He's in ICU. You can visit briefly, but he's heavily sedated and on a ventilator to support his breathing while his body fights the infection." The ICU was a jarring contrast to the James that Catherine knew. Her strong, independent husband lay unconscious, connected to machines that breathed for him, monitored his heart, and delivered medications and fluids. His skin had a grayish pallor beneath the harsh lighting, and the rhythmic whoosh of the ventilator seemed to emphasize how tenuous his condition had become. Catherine approached the bed slowly, carefully taking his hand between hers. His fingers were cool to the touch, the calluses that had always defined his working hands now seeming like artifacts of another life. "I'm here, James," she said softly, knowing he couldn't hear her but needing to speak nonetheless. "You need to fight this. We have too many years ahead of us for you to check out early." Behind her, the ICU nurse adjusted an IV drip, her movements efficient but gentle. "You can stay for 15 minutes, she said kindly. "Then you should get some rest. We'll call if there's any change." Catherine nodded, unable to tear her gaze from James's face. In sleep, the years seemed to fall away from him. She could almost see the young soldier he had been, carrying the wounds of war silently within him for decades. "I never told you," she whispered, leaning close to his ear. "I was there too, James. Not where you were, but in the same war. I was a nurse before I was a teacher. I saw what that war did to young men like you." Her voice caught. "Maybe if I'd told you, you would have felt safe enough to tell me about the wound. Maybe we could have prevented this." There was no response, only the steady beep of monitors and the mechanical rise and fall of his chest. Catherine pressed a kiss to his forehead and reluctantly allowed Sarah to lead her away with a promise to return at first light. That night, Catherine couldn't sleep. James's words echoed in her mind. "There's a metal box. You should know what's in there." Whatever secrets he had kept locked away, he wanted her to discover them now, when he might never have the chance to explain them himself. At 3 in the morning, she found herself in James's workshop, the familiar smells of sawdust and machine oil surrounding her like a presence. The workbench stood against the far wall, its surface meticulously organized, with tools hung in designated places and jars of nails and screws arranged by size. Catherine ran her hand along the underside of the bench until her fingers found a metal box bolted to the wood. It was a small safe, no larger than a hardcover book. She entered her birthday into the combination lock, 042234, and heard the satisfying click as the mechanism released. Inside lay a collection of items she had never seen: a tarnished set of dog tags, a faded photograph of young soldiers posing before a helicopter, a Purple Heart medal still in its presentation case, and a sealed envelope with Catherine written on it in James's neat block handwriting. With trembling fingers, she opened the envelope. Inside was a letter dated 20 years earlier. "My dearest Catherine," it began, "if you're reading this, it means I've either finally found the courage to share this with you, or I'm gone and you found my hiding place. Either way, it's time you knew the full truth about what happened in Vietnam and why I've kept it hidden all these years." Catherine's hands trembled as she continued reading James's letter, the workshop's single bulb casting long shadows across the page. "In April 1971, my unit was operating near Quang Tri when we received intelligence about a village allegedly harboring enemy forces. Our orders were to secure the area. What we found instead were civilians, women, children, and elderly men. No weapons, no enemy soldiers. Our commanding officer, Lieutenant Harris, was convinced the intelligence was correct. He ordered us to search every hut, detain anyone suspicious. As we carried out these orders, a firefight broke out at the edge of the village. To this day, I don't know who fired first." In the chaos that followed, Lieutenant Harris lost control of the situation and of himself. He ordered us to neutralize the village. Most of us stood frozen, unable to believe what we were hearing. That's when I saw him raise his weapon toward a group of villagers huddled together. I did the only thing I could think of. I tackled him. His weapon discharged, and I felt something tear into my back. In the struggle, I managed to subdue him, but not before he'd wounded 2 villagers. The official report stated that we were ambushed, that Lieutenant Harris was killed by enemy fire while heroically protecting civilians, and that I was wounded in the same engagement. It was a lie, Katie. Harris survived. He was quietly transferred out and eventually discharged. 3 other men in my unit knew the truth: William Parker, Dave Wilson, and Carl Johnson. We made a pact to never speak of it. The military had its narrative, and contradicting it would have meant court-martials, possibly prison. We were just kids, scared and wanting to go home. The Purple Heart they gave me is a fraud. I couldn't bear to wear it. Couldn't stand the thought of being honored for an act that, while it saved innocent lives, also covered up a terrible truth. So I buried it away along with the memories. I've lived with this secret for so long that it became part of me, like that wound in my back, something foreign embedded so deeply it couldn't be removed without causing damage. I wanted to tell you so many times, especially when we'd hear about war crimes on the news, and you'd say, "How could soldiers do such things?" I wanted you to know that sometimes the hardest courage is standing against your own. I'm sorry for not trusting you with this truth. It wasn't that I didn't trust your love. I didn't trust myself to face what happened if I spoke it aloud. Some wounds never truly heal. They just get walled off by scar tissue in time. Whatever happens, know that loving you has been the great redemption of my life. You gave me the chance to be a better man than the one who came back from that war. Always yours, James. Catherine pressed the letter to her chest, tears streaming down her face as decades of her husband's silent burden became clear. The stoicism, the nightmares he'd never explained, his reluctance to discuss his service, all of it crystallized into a single heartbreaking picture of a man carrying not just a parasite but guilt and trauma embedded as deeply as the foreign body in his flesh. Dawn was breaking as Catherine returned to the hospital, James's letter folded carefully in her purse. The ICU was quiet except for the steady beeping of monitors and the soft shuffle of nurses changing shifts. James remained unconscious, his condition unchanged through the night. Dr. Weber appeared at Catherine's side, her eyes shadowed from lack of sleep but alert. "We've received preliminary results from the lab on the tissue samples," she said quietly. "I'd like to discuss them with you if you feel up to it." Catherine nodded, reluctantly leaving James's side to follow Dr. Weber to a small consultation room. "The analysis shows something remarkable," Dr. Weber began, opening a folder containing microscope images. "The growth we removed wasn't simply cancerous tissue, nor was it merely an encapsulation response to the foreign body. It appears to be a unique adaptation of James's immune system, a highly specialized response to the prolonged presence of the parasite." Catherine stared at the images, trying to make sense of the cellular structures highlighted in various colors. "What does that mean in plain English, Doctor?" Dr. Weber leaned forward, her excitement as a scientist momentarily overriding her clinical detachment. "It means James's body created a completely novel biological structure to contain the parasite. Instead of forming ordinary scar tissue around it, his immune system developed what we might call a smart capsule, tissue that actively worked to neutralize potential toxins from the parasite while also, remarkably, seeming to derive some benefit from its presence. But if it was helping him, why did it suddenly become dangerous?" "That's the fascinating part, Doctor," Weber said. "The parasite species we identified secretes compounds that in small quantities can actually boost certain immune functions. Over decades, these substances would normally cause severe complications, but the specialized tissue James's body created was effectively managing these compounds, preventing harm while utilizing some beneficial aspects." "Until you removed it," Catherine said, understanding dawning. Dr. Weber nodded. "Exactly. When we removed both the growth and the parasite, We inadvertently disrupted this delicate balance. The surrounding tissue, which had been exposed to these compounds for years, suddenly went into a kind of shock, almost like a withdrawal response. So his body became dependent on the very thing that was also threatening it, Catherine murmured, seeing the cruel irony. In a manner of speaking, yes. It's an immunological paradox we've never documented before. Dr. Weber closed the folder. But there's good news. Now that we understand what's happening, we've adjusted his treatment. We're supporting his immune system through the transition while aggressively treating the necrotic tissue. His latest blood work shows the first signs of improvement. Catherine felt a flicker of hope. So he might recover? I believe so, yes. It won't be quick and he's not out of danger yet, but I'm cautiously optimistic. Dr. Weber hesitated, then added, Mrs. Reynolds, with your permission, we'd like to document James's case for medical research. This could help us understand long-term effects of parasitic infections in veterans, potentially helping others with similar conditions. Catherine thought of James's letter, of his desire to make something good come from his trauma. He would want that, she said softly. But there's something you should know about the origin of that wound. She carefully explained what James had revealed in his letter. Watching Dr. Weber's expression shifted from surprise to compassion. That explains why the parasite was able to establish itself so deeply, the doctor said thoughtfully. The wound wasn't properly treated in the field because of the circumstances. She reached across the table to touch Catherine's hand. This doesn't change our treatment approach, but it certainly adds context to what James has been carrying all these years, both physically and emotionally. Catherine returned to James's bedside with renewed purpose. While Sarah consulted with the medical team about her father's treatment plan, Catherine pulled her chair close and took James's hand. I read your letter, she said quietly, knowing he couldn't hear her but needing to speak the words anyway. I understand now, James, and I need you to wake up so I can tell you something too. My own secret from Vietnam. Throughout the day, the ICU staff monitored James's condition, noting small but encouraging improvements in his vital signs. By evening, his fever had begun to subside, and his oxygen requirements had decreased slightly. Dr. Anderson, reviewing the charts, allowed himself a cautious smile. He's fighting back, he told Catherine and Sarah. These are good signs. As visiting hours ended, Catherine reluctantly prepared to leave. She had just gathered her purse when a nurse rushed into James's room, quickly checking the monitors and examining him. His eyelids are fluttering, she explained, flashing a penlight across James's eyes. He might be trying to wake up. Catherine hurried back to his side, heart pounding. James, can you hear me? For a terrible moment there was no response. Then, almost imperceptibly, James's fingers twitched against hers. His eyes remained closed, but the movement was deliberate, a squeeze. He can hear you, the nurse confirmed, checking his vital signs. This is excellent progress. Keep talking to him. For the next hour, Catherine spoke continuously about their home, about Sarah's presence, about the springtime garden she would plant once he was well enough to sit on the porch and supervise. She carefully avoided mentioning the letter or the wound, saving those conversations for when he could fully participate. As night fell, William Parker returned to the hospital bearing a small, worn Bible. Thought James might want this nearby, he said, placing it on the bedside table. It's the one he carried in country. Had it in my footlocker all these years. He gave it to me for safekeeping before that mission to Quang Tri. Said if anything happened to him, he wanted his folks to have it. Catherine examined the small book, its pages yellowed and cover faded. He never mentioned this. William shrugged. Lot of things we didn't mention after coming home. He looked at James's unconscious form. 4 of us made a pact that day. Now I'm the only one left who knows the whole truth. Not anymore, Catherine said softly, explaining about the letter. I know what happened with Lieutenant Harris. William's weathered face registered shock, then relief. Never thought James would break our silence. Must have been eating at him something fierce all these years. He sank into a chair, suddenly looking every one of his 67 years. Wilson died of cancer in 85. Johnson took his own life in 92. And me? I've been carrying it like a stone in my gut since the day it happened. Why didn't you ever tell anyone? Same reason as James, I suppose. Fear, shame, the belief that nobody who wasn't there could possibly understand. William stared at his calloused hands, and after a while, keeping the secret became easier than breaking it. As William spoke, Catherine noticed James's eyelids fluttering more insistently. The monitors showed an increase in his heart rate and blood pressure, signs of heightened awareness. "William," she said urgently, "I think James can hear you." They both turned to see James's eyes open, just barely, but unmistakably conscious. The ventilator prevented him from speaking, but his gaze moved deliberately between them. "I'll get the doctor," William said, hurrying from the room. Alone with James, Catherine leaned close. "Don't try to talk. You're on a ventilator to help you breathe. You've been very sick, but you're getting better." She stroked his forehead gently. "I found your letter, James. I know about Lieutenant Harris and what happened in that village. I understand why you kept it secret all these years." James's eyes filled with tears that spilled silently down his temples. Catherine wiped them away with her thumb. "You have nothing to be ashamed of," she whispered fiercely. "What you did that day saved lives, and now, after all these years, that parasite may have saved yours too. The doctors say your body created something remarkable around it, a way to protect you from the very thing that could have poisoned you." Dr. Weber arrived quickly, performing a brief neurological assessment. "This is excellent progress," she confirmed. "If he continues improving, we may be able to wean him from the ventilator tomorrow." Later that night, after the excitement had settled and Sarah had convinced her to go home for a few hours' rest, Catherine sat alone in their living room, surrounded by photographs documenting their life together. James in his work clothes, proudly displaying the deck he'd built. James holding infant Sarah, his expression a mixture of terror and adoration. James and Catherine on their 40th anniversary cruise, their faces lined but happy. In none of these images could she see the burden he'd been carrying, the physical presence of the parasite, the metaphorical weight of his secret. Yet he had built a life of integrity and love despite it all. Perhaps, she reflected, that was its own kind of courage. Tomorrow she would tell James her own story about the field hospital in Quang Tri, about the wounded soldiers and civilians she had treated, about the nightmares that had driven her from nursing into the healing sanctuary of an elementary school classroom. They would finally share the full truth of who they had been before they met, before they became the people they had spent a lifetime pretending to be. And perhaps in that sharing, they might find a deeper healing than either had thought possible after all these years. In James's hospital room, the monitors continued their steady rhythm, marking the stubborn persistence of a heart that had survived war, carried a parasite for nearly half a century, and still found the strength to keep beating, damaged but enduring, much like the man himself. 6 months later, James Reynolds sat on his front porch, watching the late June sunlight filter through the maple leaves. His recovery had been slow but steady. 2 weeks in the hospital, another month in rehabilitation, and then the gradual return to something resembling normal life. The surgical scar on his back had healed into a puckered reminder, no longer painful, but impossible to forget. Catherine emerged from the house, carrying 2 glasses of iced tea, the lemon slices bobbing among the ice cubes. She handed one to James and settled into the wicker chair beside him, their evening ritual since the weather had turned warm. "Sarah called," she said, taking a sip from her glass. "She's presenting the case study next week at the medical conference in Chicago." Says there's been enormous interest from veterans' health researchers. James nodded, a hint of pride crossing his weathered face. Still seems strange having doctors all excited about something that tried to kill me. Something that protected you for 45 years, then tried to kill you, Catherine corrected gently. That's what makes it so remarkable. Indeed, James's case had become something of a medical sensation in certain circles. The way his body had constructed an elaborate biological filtration system around the foreign organism was being studied as a potential key to understanding long-term responses to parasitic infections. Knowledge that could help thousands of veterans who, like James, carried pieces of war within their bodies. William called too, Catherine continued. Says the VA finally approved his disability claim. Your testimony made the difference. James smiled, genuine pleasure lightening his features. About time they recognized what Agent Orange did to his lungs only took 50 years. The months of recovery had transformed more than just James's physical health. After Catherine had shared her own Vietnam experiences, the field hospital in Quang Tri, the wounded soldiers and civilians she had treated, her reasons for abandoning nursing, something had unlocked between them. Conversations that had been impossible for decades now flowed easily, the shared understanding of what they had both witnessed creating a deeper connection than either had thought possible after so many years. James had made two difficult but liberating decisions during his convalescence. First, he had contacted a military historian specializing in Vietnam War testimony, recording his account of what had happened in that village near Quang Tri. Without naming the other soldiers involved, he had finally spoken his truth, contributing to the complex historical record of a war whose full reality was still emerging decades later. His second decision had been harder, reaching out to Sarah with the complete story, including both the physical and moral wounds he had carried throughout her childhood. Their relationship, always loving but sometimes distant, had deepened through his vulnerability and her compassionate understanding. "I've been thinking," James said now, looking out over their modest front yard where daylilies nodded in the gentle breeze. "About that trip we always talked about." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "Which one? We've talked about a lot of trips we never took." "The big one, Vietnam." Catherine's hand stilled, her glass halfway to her lips. "You're serious?" James nodded, his expression contemplative. "William found this Veterans Reconciliation Program. American vets returning to meet with Vietnamese veterans, visit sites, even participate in community projects. He's thinking of going in October. And you want to join him?" "I think," James paused, searching for words, "I think maybe it's time to see it through different eyes. Not as a terrified 20-year-old soldier, but as an old man who's had a good life despite what happened there." He turned to face her directly. "But I'd only go if you came too. To see the places you were, maybe to close that circle together." Catherine reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of decades. "I never thought I'd want to go back, but now, with you, yes. I think it might be healing for both of us." They sat in comfortable silence as the evening shadows lengthened across the lawn. So much had changed since that January day when Catherine had noticed the changing mole on James's back. What had begun as a medical crisis had transformed into a journey of truth-telling and reconciliation neither had anticipated. The ringing phone interrupted their contemplation. Catherine went inside to answer it, returning moments later with a puzzled expression. "That was Dr. Weber," she said. "She wants to meet with us tomorrow. Says there's something important she needs to discuss about your case." James frowned. "Did she say what?" "I just had my checkup last week. Everything looked fine. She didn't give details, just said it wasn't urgent, but it was significant." Catherine sat back down, concern creasing her brow. said it has to do with the final analysis of the tissue they removed. The following morning found them once again in Dr. Weber's office, though the circumstances were far less dire than their previous visits. The young doctor greeted them warmly, her professional manner tempered with the genuine affection that had developed through James's treatment. "Thank you for coming in," she began, gesturing them to comfortable chairs. "First, let me assure you that this isn't about any health concern. James's recovery continues to progress excellently." "Then what's this about, Doc?" James asked, his natural directness undiminished by his medical ordeal. Dr. Weber opened a folder on her desk. "As you know, we've been conducting extensive analysis on the tissue removed from your back as well as the parasite itself. The findings have been remarkable from a medical perspective, offering insights into how the body responds to long-term foreign bodies." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "What I need to discuss with you today is something unexpected that emerged in the final biological analysis of the parasite." Catherine felt James tense beside her. "What about it?" he asked. "The parasite wasn't a common species found in Vietnam," Dr. Weber said. "It's a rare tropical organism found primarily in a very specific region of central Vietnam, within about 20 miles of Quang Tri. Its life cycle requires a particular environmental condition found only in certain villages in that area." James's face remained impassive, but Catherine felt his hand seek hers beneath the edge of the desk. "Additionally," Dr. Weber continued, "the tissue structure surrounding the parasite suggests the wound was inflicted at very close range, consistent with your account of struggling with Lieutenant Harris." "What are you saying exactly?" Catherine asked, though she suspected she already knew. Dr. Weber met their gaze directly. "I'm saying that the physical evidence fully corroborates James's account of what happened that day in the village. The Department of Veterans Affairs has requested these findings as part of their ongoing review of previously unreported incidents. With your permission, I would provide them with the technical analysis without any personal identification." James was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally he asked, "There were others?" Other incidents like what happened in that village?" Dr. Weber nodded solemnly. "Unfortunately, yes. Your testimony, along with this physical evidence, helps establish a pattern that officials are now acknowledging decades later." The implications hung in the air between them. After nearly 50 years, the truth James had carried within his body was finally emerging, not just as his personal burden, but as part of a larger historical reckoning. "Will this help other veterans?" James asked simply. "Potentially, yes. Both medically and in terms of validating experiences that were officially denied or covered up." James nodded decisively. "Then you have my permission. Use whatever you need from my case." After leaving the hospital, James was unusually quiet during the drive home, staring out the passenger window at the summer landscape flashing by. Catherine gave him the space to process, understanding that some revelations required silence before words could form around them. It wasn't until they were back home, sitting at their kitchen table with mugs of coffee between them, that James finally spoke. "All these years," he said softly, "I thought I was protecting myself by keeping silent. Turns out I might have been protecting the wrong people." Catherine reached across the table to take his hand. "You did what you thought was right at the time, James. We all did. But if I'd spoken up sooner, maybe other veterans wouldn't have carried their secrets alone for so long." His eyes, faded blue but still sharp, met hers. "Maybe you and I wouldn't have had those walls between us all those years." "We can't change the past," Catherine said gently. "But look at what's happening now because you finally told your truth. That counts for something important." James nodded slowly. "It's strange, isn't it? That parasite was killing me inch by inch for decades, but In the end, it might help heal others. A hint of his old wry smile touched his lips. Sounds like one of those sermon metaphors Pastor Jim is so fond of. Catherine smiled. He'd certainly make a Sunday message out of it if he knew the whole story. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sarah, who had driven in from Chicago for the weekend. Since James's hospitalization, these visits had become more frequent and more meaningful, the superficial family dynamics replaced by deeper connections. "So, what did Dr. Weber want?" Sarah asked after settling in, her clinical curiosity evident. James explained the situation, his voice steady as he outlined the technical confirmation of his long-held secret. Sarah listened with both professional interest and daughterly concern. "Dad," she said when he had finished, "have you considered talking to a PTSD specialist? The VA has some excellent programs specifically for Vietnam veterans." James's initial instinct to dismiss the suggestion was visible on his face, but after a moment's reflection, he surprised both women by nodding thoughtfully. "Might not be the worst idea," he conceded. "William's been going to a group at the VA hospital in Grand Rapids. Says it helps, talking to other guys who were there." "It helped me," Catherine added quietly, "after your father got sick. I started attending a support group for military nurses. Just being able to speak about those experiences after keeping them buried for so long, it was like finally being able to breathe fully." Later that evening, as Sarah helped Catherine prepare dinner, she marveled at the change in her parents. "I feel like I'm getting to know you both for the first time," she admitted, chopping vegetables at the counter. "All those years I knew something was locked away, but I never understood what." Catherine smiled sadly. "We thought we were protecting you by not burdening you with our ghosts. But they shaped our family anyway," Sarah observed. "The silences, Dad's nightmares, your career change that I never knew about until now." She paused, knife suspended over a half-cut carrot. "I keep thinking about all my patients over the years. How many of them might be carrying similar secrets, physical or emotional wounds they never reveal?" "That awareness will make you an even better doctor," Catherine said, squeezing her daughter's shoulder. Through the kitchen window they could see James on the porch, deep in conversation with William Parker, who had stopped by unannounced, something that had been happening more frequently since James's recovery. The two old soldiers sat with heads bent together, occasionally gesturing as they spoke, their postures more relaxed than Catherine could remember seeing in all the decades of their friendship. "They're planning the Vietnam trip," Sarah said, following her mother's gaze. "Dad called me last night to ask about vaccinations and health precautions." Catherine nodded. "I think it's important for him. For both of us, really. Are you nervous about going back?" Catherine considered the question seriously. "Not nervous exactly, but I wonder how it will feel to see those places again, if they'll even be recognizable after so many years." She smiled reflectively. "The last time I was there, I was young and traumatized and desperate to escape. Now I'll be returning as an old woman with perspective and hopefully some wisdom. And with Dad," Sarah added. "That makes all the difference, doesn't it?" "It does," Catherine agreed, watching her husband through the window. "We missed the chance to share those experiences when they were happening. But now, somehow, we've been given another opportunity to face them together." On the porch, James looked up and caught Catherine watching him. He smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that reached his eyes and erased decades of careful self-containment. In that moment, Catherine saw not just the man she had married, but the whole of him, the young soldier, the wounded veteran, the husband who had kept parts of himself hidden, and now this newest version, a man finally at peace with his complete story. The parasite that had lived within him for nearly half a century was gone, but what remained was something more valuable, the truth it had carried, finally exposed to the healing light of day. James and Catherine's story reminds us that it's never too late to heal old wounds and share our deepest truths. For nearly 50 years, they carried separate burdens from Vietnam. He, with a parasite physically embedded in his body, she with memories of being a battlefield nurse, each protecting the other from pain through silence. It took a medical crisis at age 65 to finally bring their hidden pasts to light, allowing them to truly see each other completely for the first time. Their journey shows us that the secrets we think protect us often become the walls that separate us from those we love most. Whether you served in Vietnam, lived through those turbulent times, or carry your own unspoken stories, remember that sharing your truth can be the most powerful medicine of all. The courage to be vulnerable, even after decades of silence, can open doors to deeper connection and unexpected healing. For 50 years, James and Catherine carried the weight of Vietnam separately. He, with a physical reminder embedded in his flesh, she with memories tucked away in her heart. Both thought silence was protection, until a medical crisis at 65 revealed the parasite that had been growing alongside their unspoken truths. Their story reminds us that it's never too late to unbind ourselves from the past. The secrets we keep to shield ourselves and those we love often become the very walls that separate us from genuine connection. Many of you fought in Vietnam or waited at home for someone who did. Others carry different burdens, unshared grief, unacknowledged trauma, or simply parts of yourselves deemed too painful to reveal. But imagine the freedom of finally setting down that weight, of being truly seen and accepted. James and Catherine found deeper love in their 70s than they'd known in decades of marriage, simply by sharing their complete selves. What truth have you been carrying that might actually heal if brought into the light? What relationship in your life might transform if you risked vulnerability? We'd love to hear your stories of secrets finally shared or moments when speaking your truth changed everything. Leave a comment below. Your courage might be exactly what someone else needs to find their own healing.